go. Okay, wonderful. So wait, okay, just so we know what everyone's here for, are you here to like understand psychoanalysis so you can run it or answer it, or you're just curious?
I'm curious as to like what it is because from like what I was told, like a lot of critiques, like they like a lot of critiques, they like it requires well, I don't know requires, but like it just talks about psychoanalysis and stuff. So
This is true. This is
yeah.
actually very true. Um, okay, wonderful. That makes sense. Let me, oh, okay, pause. I need to pause the recording. Okay. I love pink if you haven't gathered that. But yeah, this is psychoanalysis. So about me, I love psychoanalysis. I fear I run psychoanalysis like every single time I negate on the circuit, and embarrassingly at a couple of locals as well. I this is my third year running it, which is kind of insane. I got into it at camp, um, like by complete chance. I just like didn't get assigned to an elective, and they're like, okay, go to this one. There's extra space, and then I love psychoanalysis now, and it's probably a problem. But anyways, on to the elective. So brief background on psychoanalysis slash Lacan, who's like the main author used for psychoanalysis and debate. His name is Jacques Lacan. He was a student of Freud, which shaped a lot of his work because that's where he learned all the basics of psychoanalysis, which he then shaped into his own kind of theory, separately from Freud's. A lot of his work is a result of dealing with soldiers post World War II. He grew up in France. He is French, lived there his whole life. So he worked with a lot of soldiers from World War II, and they had PTSD, and that's mostly what shaped his theories. He was an early set of psychoanalysts that are basically philosophers because this really isn't that terribly based in science and mostly just like broad theorizing about the world. But they draw connections between the subject and psychoanalytical sessions and then apply those to the world around them. I think Lacan was definitely one of the first, and then from there we have like a lot of people that do it now, and it's looking really interesting. But first, there's two important triads that kind of shape Lacan's theory. The first one is the id, ego, and superego, which you've probably heard about in like English class. I don't know. I know we went over this whenever we read Lord of the Flies freshman year, and then again with like Life of Pi sophomore year. But the id is basically intrinsic needs and desires that everyone has. The superego is how we go about handling the id, ideally knowing the like norms around us. And then the ego is how we actually go about dealing with the id in the context of the superego. So the example that's there on the screen, I think, is helpful because the id is just like, I want to do this. Like, that's it. Like, this is just my desire. The superego is like, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to do this. And then the ego will just be like, well, maybe we can do this right now, but we can do it in a little bit. Um, so the other example that I was taught that made me understand it was the id is like you being hungry. The superego is mean like, okay, well, I'm going to go like hunt for food because I need to get to food in order to like satiate my hunger. And then the ego is, well, no, I actually don't need to go hunt for food. I can actually just go to the grocery store and buy food in order to satiate that hunger and then actually do it um, IRL. So the second one is where things start getting a little bit more confusing. Um, so it's the real, fantasy, and symbolic, um, which if you have any questions or this is confusing at all, then you should unmute or like raise your hand because I kind of cannot really see the chat well. Um, and this might get a little bit confusing because it's kind of a complicated thing to explain, but I will do my best. So the real is basically the full true human experience. We only briefly experience this when we're babies, at least according to Lacan. And it's like this absolute full experience that as we undergo the process of alienation, which we'll explain later, we this kind of becomes terrifying to us and we don't want to like experience it. So we construct artificial layers between the real and us, which are mediated through the fantasy and symbolic. But this is also that we don't have to confront it. The fantasy is the iconography that shapes our comprehension of the world around us in the sense that that's how it's communicated to us. So, for example, well, I'm using the example of like vision because like that's generally applicable to everyone, but it's not exclusively like psychoanalysis as a theory isn't exclusively accessible to like people who can see or talk or like communicate, which we'll get to in a second. But we process the information around us through symbols or like images, so that's kind of what the fantasy is about. Just like seeing the things around us and understanding that like it represents this thing. So like this black rectangle sitting in front of me is not a black rectangle, it's a laptop. Um, and then the symbolic is the register where the social like norms and rules around us reside, and this controls and shapes how we interact with the world around us. So this would just be learning manners like please or thank you. Those would all be examples of the symbolic functioning. So these three together shape our interaction and understanding of the world around us because it controls how we perceive things around us and then therefore how we decide to interact with it. Does all of this make sense so far?
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so if the sort of fantasy is our kind of iconography or like the methods through which we like process the world, then the symbolic is like kind of the way we interact with it through the fantasy or
So the symbolic is more so just like generally, like if you just think of it as like social norms and rules, like that's basically it. Like that's actually like the entirety of the symbolic. The way that they interact with each other is that the fantasy like feeds the information that shapes the symbolic kind of. And then those two together like construct layers between us and the real because we don't like that and it's scary and traumatizing.
okay, sorry to like reveal my like layers, but is it like similar to like Baudrillard's idea of the hyper real?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Is it like similar to like Baudrillard's ideas of like the hyper real? And okay, thank you.
Yeah. So with Baudrillard's hyperreal, for him, things like don't really have a meaning and don't really make sense. For like his hyperreal because they're like symbols of symbols and whatever, and they like lack accurate understanding. That's not as much as what Lacan is saying. He's mostly just saying that these symbols have meanings to us that shape how we interact with the world around us and understand things. It's not so much as like an extrapolated version of like nothing has meaning or everything has meaning. It's just like this is just what things are for us. And this is how they're communicated. So the next part, oh my God, I don't know why this doesn't work. Okay, so alienation. This is like the biggest thing that makes us into subjects, that allows us to like access all the other parts of psychoanalysis that's used in debate. So there's this thing called the mirror stage, according to Lacan. And it's when you're roughly 6 to 18 months old, so you're a baby. It first begins whenever they start to like look in mirrors. So Lacan was like, it's weird that children around this age just like to look at themselves in the mirror. And then they just like stare at themselves for hours, and just look at the mirror. And he's like, this is kind of odd. And then he understands this phase as children starting to understand and recognize the image in the mirror as being themselves. Um, and thus they form through this one object permanence because they understand that like even if they can't see their body or like their face is still there because they can see it in the mirror. And then also object permanence and cause and effect. Because as they're like doing things in front of the mirror, they can see like the things that they do have actions or sorry, consequences. And then the ideal subject or subject I is just the understanding of themselves. So you can see yourself in a mirror and be like, that is me. But because of that, you can also understand whether that's what you want to be or if that's not what you want to be. And through this, you have a conception of what you ideally would like to be or not like to be. Does that make sense? Okay. As long as no one interrupts me, I'm going to assume that it makes sense. Um, so then we get on to the speaking subject. So, sorry, I have like something in my throat. But anyways, as children slowly understand the way that people around them communicate ideas, they understand that they too can communicate their needs, becoming speaking subjects. This doesn't have to be literal speaking. It can be any sort of communication, whether that is like literal speaking, sign language, just like smiling at someone. For Lacan, communication can take functionally any form. For him, just like looking at someone is a form of communication because like the way you look at them shapes like the way like ideas you're trying to communicate. So they understand that they can communicate their needs to others around them. But through the process of like the mirror stage and like understanding this, but then also understanding that people communicate their needs to get them met, they go through the process of alienation where a gap forms between our needs and desires and our ability to communicate them. For Lacan, you can never actually communicate what you're trying to say because language is subjective to the individual and also has different meanings since it's subjective. So when I'm trying to communicate like how hungry I am, another person may not understand the extent to that hunger, which creates a gap between what we're able to communicate and our actual like needs and desires. So ultimately it comes down to desires, which is like one of the main parts of psychoanalysis and debate. As children learn to express their needs and understand the needs of others, they also begin to understand desires. So these are things that they don't necessarily need to survive, but they believe will make them happier. Part of this, where it gets a little bit confusing, is a lot of psychoanalysis people will just conflate the term desires and needs in the same way, which I try to do, like not do because it gets confusing otherwise. But for Lacan, these desires function as needs almost because we believe without them we'll be like upset or whatever, which we'll get to, I think, on the next slide. But yeah, that makes us to the lack, which is the main driving action for Lacan. So the lack, as we undergo or alienation, forms because of the gap to communicate our needs and our desires true forms. The lack is that area between the two where we're not able to actually communicate what we want. This causes tension and anxiety within the subjects and is what causes our drives because the lack is uncomfortable. So we try to fill it with whatever we think will make us truly satisfied or happy. So this could be me, I don't know. This is the example I always use. I enjoy debate. I think it's fun. So I prepare for tournaments because I want to win rounds or win the tournament. And I think that that will make me happy. But winning one round is never enough. I want to win the next, and then I want to win the tournament, and then I want to win the next tournament. Which gets to the lost object or object petit a, but that's the French word, so we're not really going to use that. But if you read it, that's what it is. The lack can ever truly be filled by the lost object, but post alienation, it will forever be lost to us. So we can never truly be satisfied in the way that we imagine ourselves being. But we don't want to accept that we will always feel unfulfilled. So we continue to pursue various things, believing that they could potentially be the lost object. But this only makes the lack bigger and creates tension within the subject as we're unable to actually pursue what we believe will make us truly satisfied. Because according to Lacan, you can never be truly satisfied. Yes, Lily.
Sorry. So he thinks that like sorry, in on the sort of lost object is like the ability to connect with the real in the way you can before alienation. And then we do other things in order to try and we do things that because we think that they are the lost object, but the lost object is just this disconnect from like language.
Yes. Yes. Um, I'm so good at explaining things. Oh my God. But yeah, so the like we constantly will give meaning to various things, thinking they are going to be like the lost object that ultimately fills us. But as soon as like we reach that object or goal or like get that thing, it suddenly is no longer the lost object and it is now something else because it will unfortunately forever remain lost. Um, so that's the thesis of the K. Um, we're gonna like so the parts of the K are the theory of power, role of the ballot, link, impact, alternative, and then like K-tricks, which are optional but very fun and make psychoanalysis more strategic. I think before we go into like, well, I lied. I think we're gonna go into like the individual parts because it also shapes like fills out psychoanalysis as like a theory. And then I'll make the extrapolations to ontology for you here. Because psychoanalysis is the root of all pesques. Um, so yeah, first our links. Um, there like will always be a topic link. There will always be some random psychoanalyst who wrote about the topic in some capacity and why it's an attempt to fill the lack. You just need to find them. Sometimes you need to dig a little deeper, or sometimes you may need to like abstract it out a little bit, but there will always be a link. I have never not found a link. I have found worse links, but also usually just because I'm looking for the link like the night before the tournament and then I'll say I'll go find a better link before the next tournament, but then I don't because I already have a link and that's sufficient enough for me. But there will always be a topic link out there. The
So,
next is debate links. So this could be like debate bad or the way that people interact with debate is bad. Um, so usually it's just some way of engaging in debate is an attempt to fill the lack, which is bad, because that just makes us more unhappy. Um, the card that like everyone reads, including myself, is this Lundberg 12 evidence that talks about how trying to win a debate is trying to seek recognition from the other, which we think will make us happy. But it can't because it's not the lost object. Then there's the politics link, which is just policymaking is bad or policymaking as is right now is bad. Um, so this could be for a couple different reasons. Just the way that like the government is structured is an attempt to fill the lack. Policymakers inherently make policy as an attempt to fill the lack. There's a lot of different explanations for this online if you just look into them. Similar to that is the optimism link. That's just like trying to create a better, more perfect world is an attempt to fill the lack because we don't like that there are imperfections in society or the world as is right now. But they'll always ultimately exist. So trying to get rid of them is an attempt to fill the lack and is bad and ultimately creates like a less utopian world than what you're trying to create. And then the last one is the nostalgia link, which is honestly my favorite. Um, it's that for whatever reason, the app's politics are a retreat into nostalgia, which is bad because it's an attempt to fill the lack. So one topic that I remember reading this on was the universal healthcare topic, which I don't know if any of y'all debated on actually. But it was like the resolution was just the United States ought to like provide like universal healthcare, something to that extent. I don't remember the exact wording. This was a while ago. Yes, nostalgia does link into capitalism. Oh, whoopsie. Nostalgia does link into capitalism. Because it's just saying that we try to go back to a more perfect understanding of whatever X thing is that we believe we used to have, whether we actually had it or not. But because that thing no longer is, we now, in hindsight, see it as perfect and more better. So we try to recreate policies that bring us back to that. So on the healthcare topic, it was just like, um, we're using healthcare as an attempt to like go back to a more perfect healthcare system. Um, but universal healthcare is not going to be that because it's just an attempt to fill the lack and retreat into nostalgia, which is bad. It makes us unhappy. Capitalism functions as a nostalgia link because it's similar to like the idea of trying to go back to a more perfect economic system. So the examples you could draw here are just like similarities between like capitalism and then prior economic systems that were used. So like you could use ideas of like serfdom and whatever, um, of how we believe like these systems were more perfect and more equal, but they never were, and they were always kind of bad, because economy just generally is always going to be unfair inherently. So it's a retreat to nostalgia, which is bad and attempt to fill the lack. Ultimately, all of your links are just going to say whatever action is just an attempt to fill the lack, which is bad. That's like the root of all of the links. ultimately. Um, yes. Oh my God. I don't know why the space bar isn't working to go to the next slide. But the next part is roll of the ballot, um, which is optional. Which I didn't understand the strategic value of until like this past summer at camp when Bodhi was like, Sumya, pause. Let's think about this for a second. What if you didn't read roll of the ballot? But anyways, the roll of the ballot, I'm sure there are other roll of the ballots out there. I'm not claiming this is the only one. This is the only one I'm familiar with. So it's the only one I'm gonna explain. It's just traversing the fantasy, which just kind of says to kind of get rid of the symbolic and understand the world only through the fantasy because the symbolic where like social norms and rules reside is what causes, for example, um, inequality or whatever issue that you want to frame the app out to be, is all a result of the symbolic. So traversing the fantasy, is the only way to kind of get rid of these gaps between, like our understanding of the world and, um, like what's actually there that causes whatever bad things to happen. Does this make sense so far?
Does reading a roll of the ballot of traversing the fantasy not link harder to the critique than the app itself?
Why?
Because you're basically attempting to like you're attempting to like reconnect with this real through like literature and this pre-existing structure of debate and like academic spaces because you think you can like you're trying to like reveal alienation as a way to stop like the need to fill the lack.
Okay, on a truth level, I think this is probably right. Obviously, you're not going to say that in a debate round. The answer you say in a debate round, whenever they're like, wait, isn't you reading a K also an attempt to fill the lack or whatever? Your answer is going to be no. We understand the way that like the lack functions, and we're just trying to spread that so that everyone can have like a good value to life. Um, and ultimately, that like in turn makes our own better, which we'll get to on the impact slide. But your answer is always just going to be that no, we understand psychoanalysis, but you don't. So we're spreading the knowledge. That's basically the answer every single time. Um, the impact. This is always going to be value to life. There's this one card that I think everyone universally reads. It's Rudy 14. Um, and it just says that attempting to like pursue the lack just creates uh sorry, my mind just blanked. Attempting to pursue the lack lowers our values to life, ethics, and politics. So what this means is attempting to fill the lack worsens our politics for reasons that were like on the link page and we'll also get to on like the K-Trix page. It worsens our ethics because as we try to be more and more ethical or more better, this is especially in the context of like fill-offs or chaos, um, we ultimately like invest in those harms more, which will also make more sense on the K-Trix slide. And then worsens our value to life because of the fact that we're trying to pursue these things, but that only makes us more unhappy, which is obviously bad because it causes more tension within the subject, which is bad because it makes us feel bad. Um, I think this is like functionally the only impact ever read with psychoanalysis. Um, I could be wrong, but this is like the only one I was ever taught and the only one I've ever heard from anyone else ever. So we're just gonna go, it's the only one. Next is I have no idea what's next. Where is my mouse? Okay, the alternative. So there's two main alternatives. Okay, this is not on that slide. Um, the first one is embracing the lack, which we already discussed. It's just kind of this way of being like, hey, all these things happen. And they're all an attempt to fill the lack, but we can never be happy. And the more that we try to fill the lack, the more unhappy we become. So instead, we need to embrace the lack. We need to open ourselves up to this understanding that we can never truly be satisfied, and only that can reduce the anxiety within the subject. It's not going to completely get rid of it, but it significantly reduces it and allows us to still have like a meaningful life that we feel is fulfilling. The other one is embracing the death drive. However, that alternative is less consistent with the K as I have taught y'all because it's just the way that I choose to read it. A lot of the death drive stuff is more often read with various pest Ks like queer pests. The argument for those alts is that we do so there's like another part of psychoanalysis that says this is more based in Freudian psychoanalysis, where he talks about how we have the death drive. We take um part of actions that almost bring us closer to a feeling of death, or almost make us feel like we like could die. So an example of this is like roller coasters. Like truth level, like your body's getting flung through the air at like crazy speeds. This probably would kill you if you weren't like strapped down to something that has like extensive safety features. But because it brings us closer to a feeling of death, we think it'll make us happier. However, endless pursuits of these can obviously be bad, as they can ultimately be dangerous. So instead, we should embrace the death drive and open ourselves up to these ideas about death and become more familiar with it and less worried, because he theorizes that because of like the unknowingness of death and the fact that we don't understand it, we try to get closer to it, but that's bad because you'll like die at some point, most likely, according to Freud. Yes, Lily.
I have another question. I also have a cold in case you haven't noticed, but like, is the reason that we do things that make us feel closer to death because it brings us closer to like the real, or is it just because we
Yes.
want to die?
Yes. So, um, a lot. Oh my God. What is my thing doing? No. Okay. Pause. Wonderful. Um, so with Freud and Lacan, again, the real is like this scary thing, but because we no longer have access to it, it's almost enticing to us. So because of that, we engage with the death drive the same way that we engage with it in order to have a better understanding of death without actually dying. Um, but yes. Also, I don't have like a dedicated page to this because I just didn't get around to it. But we can like briefly go over things that explain things more in depth and probably with a better understanding. Um, but if you want to understand psychoanalysis more, you probably just have to like read and watch videos, which is what I did. Mostly other than talk to this person who was like super into psychoanalysis and like got to quarters of the TOC reading psychoanalysis. Although they could debate, which is really sad. But anyways, there's this one YouTube channel that explains everything really well, which is like I think probably what made me like fall in love, quote unquote, with psychoanalysis. It's called Plastic Pills. They have a lot of philosophy videos, and I think that they don't really make that many Lacan videos anymore. Like all their Lacan videos are from like 3, 4 years ago, but that's fine because they're really good and they explain things really well. Another one is the Evans Brother Productions. They have really good visuals and again explanations of psychoanalytic concepts. They both explain them really well. And then like the main book that's like used for psychoanalysis that people will cut like links from or like the alt from is Todd McGowan's Enjoying the Pleasures That We Don't Have. Um, if you want, I can send a PDF of this book to y'all so you can access it. But those are like the main three things that I did. It's literally just like talking to people who know psychoanalysis, watching videos about from people who know psychoanalysis, and then reading books from people that know psychoanalysis. I don't think any of y'all are in Texas. So I can't really give my recommendations of people to just like find at tournaments and chit chat with. Unfortunately, there's not that many people who actually know psychoanalysis anymore, which is kind of tragic. Um, but yeah, so maybe chit-chatting with people is not going to be your top choice unless you go to TDC at summer. Then there's very knowledgeable people there. But I don't know how many of y'all are applying there for summer camps. But yeah. Next is the alternative. Um, or I lied. We just did the alternative. My bad, y'all. Next is the K-Tricks, which is the fun stuff. Which is also what makes psychoanalysis very fun to read. There's four main ones that like I'll read slash go for because I think that they're just like good and people tend to drop them a lot. The first one is the floating pick, which is just like any floating pick. We endorse the entirety of the app minus this one part. That one part is going to be their use of debate and or their call for the ballot. Because for them, the ballot is like it's like seeking the ballot is an attempt to fill the lack, which is bad and causes bad policies. So we think the app is a good idea, just not the way that they engage with debate. The next one is the alt selves root cause, which just says that the harms of the app are a result of an attempt to fill the lack. So, absent the alt, the harms will continue to reproduce themselves. So, only doing the alt can actually solve for the app. And then all of their policies that they engage in to get rid of these harms and solve for them are just further attempts to fill the lack that reinvest in them as a harm. The next one is Serial Policy Killer, which is very fun. This is Extinction Spillover, like my favorite things to go for. It just says that since policies are passed as an attempt to fill the lack, they'll always fail because one, we can never fill the lack, which means that two, we learn to enjoy failures, meaning our policies are bound to fail because our subconscious gets pleasure from these continuous failures. And then the last one is Extinction Spillover. This is like my number one to go for. Both of these only work against policy apps. Um, but more often than not, that's what you're debating. But extinction spillover is just talking about how your talks of extinction, and attempting to solve it through debate makes the people in the room more numb to extinction scenarios in the real world. So if there were actual extinction threats in real life, we would ignore them, allowing for extinction to actually happen. So if you buy the entirety of the app's framing about how we need to stop extinction and extinction is like the worst possible threat, you vote negative because they reinvest in extinction and make it more likely to happen. Only saying no to the app is able to solve for it. This is really fun to go for, because it also means like if they um like restart in the 1AR or something, or like they like for whatever reason just don't go for it, um in whatever like way that you would imagine, you can still go for Serial Policy Killer and Extinction Spillover because it's just the fact that they were read in the round in the 1AC um means that they've already been triggered, um regardless of if they think or not. For Serial Policy Killer, the reason why it doesn't work as good with like chaos is because they're not really policies. They're more like abstract actions more often than not. Um, so there's not really a way for them to fail other than just like movements failing, which is kind of different in the sense that psychoanalysis would like has more explanatory power if you explain it away as an attempt to fill a lack to solve for like these inequalities rather than a policy that we're trying to pass um, just to create more failure. Because oftentimes I think it's hard to say that you enjoy experiencing like oppression. So you're like the app is engaging in their or like their movements to like reinvest in those failures. It's much more easy to explain with Serial Policy Killer for policy apps. With identity apps, the argument that I make is just it's an attempt to fill the lack. And the alt solves root cause argument, where the only way to actually solve for like these like structural violence that's like embedded within the system is by embracing the lack because all of like the violence that happens in the world is a result of one, the symbolic, through these social norms that we learn from people around us, i.e., to be like racist or homophobic. We learn like those are learned behaviors um, that emerge from alienation in the symbolic. So embracing the lack is the only way to actually get rid of them. Um, I'll also explain the pest stuff here. Um, so with I don't really know disability pests like at all, so I'm not gonna explain that one. But I have a better understanding of psychoanalysis with queer pests and afro pests. Um, but the way that it works is that they both use Lacan slash Freud's theory of libidinal drives and desires to explain why violence happens to X and Y groups. Um, so why reading psychoanalysis is strategic against both of these is because one, they can't contest your theory of power because otherwise it means the app's theory of power also fails. And then one, they wouldn't concede that because that's like kind of bad for them. Or two, it triggers presumption, in which the presumption negates page is much easier to win. Um, so they can't contest your theory of power. And then psychoanalysis truth level does have a better like quote unquote solvency mechanism of just like embracing the lack to solve for the root cause of these issues than I think the Ks do themselves. Which is why reading psychoanalysis against various like identity or past Ks or KFs is very strategic. I think one-off psychoanalysis works really well sometimes whenever you can make um a really like extrapolated case page, which usually one will happen for me whenever I'm debating like queer pest or Afropest or a fill off that I just straight turn. Um, because like the K itself tends to be really short. Like I get through reading like my psycho Ks like anywhere between like a minute 30, 2 minutes, depending on like how many links I'm reading slash what the links are. So then you can spend a lot of time on case, which I think is much preferable than reading like ADOFs against like a non-TF just because you don't want to answer it. Because I think psychoanalysis oftentimes is able to explain these really well and have much better solvency mechanisms for them. The next part is like giving a 2 on psycho. Are there any questions up until here?
Oh, when are you gonna do the K-trick stuff?
That was the previous slide about pause. That was the oh my god, this does not want to work. These were the K tricks.
Oh, wait,
Um,
those are tricks.
huh?
Those are tricks.
Well, okay, the floating pig is a trick. Also, recalls not really a trick. The bottom two,
Wait, what are tricks?
In the context, I'm just wondering because I thought like K-trick for Psycho would be like some random spike that's like, oh, vote neg to like whatever.
yeah. So I mean, they definitely exist. I just don't think most judges are going to be willing to vote on them. Oh my God, guys, I was so sad. This past weekend, I was at a tournament and the app, well, one, I was debating someone who I worked on an app with. So this was really unfortunate, but I was negating. And the entirety of the app is about how there's like communicative gaps between what we're able to like um or like there's like symbols have meanings that aren't like communicated to everyone and they're like tooled against us. And I was like, oh my God, a linguistics Scud 2 from Psychic would be great on this. And then I asked my judge, I was like, hey Alfonso, would you vote on linguistics Scud? And he was like, no, unless it was like clean conceded. And I was like, oh, this is tragic.
You know, sorry, this is like a side note, but like, you know the like Scopa app on this topic?
No.
Okay, it's like it's Derrida, but it triggers linguistics gap because it starts with like language is meaningless and is like
A lot of
shaped
Scopa
by
apps
what
trigger linguistics.
like exactly. So then like I had a friend who like hit it and was like, "Oh, I'll read like Set Cole and Linguistics Gap." And then because then it's like either the app has to kick their theory of power or like go really hard in the presumption debate. And then they checked the judge's paradigm and it was like, I don't vote on SCAP. I think it's uneducational.
Yeah, truth level, I think Skep is probably uneducational, but I also think if
Like
I
if it links, it
communicated what I
links.
meant by linguistic Skep, and not like a two-liner in the one NC, but like an actual like fleshed out Skep page in the one NC, Alfonso probably would have been more um open to buying it. But that's low-key a lot of work. And I also didn't want to do all that, like talking with the judge. I feel like that's probably mildly unfair. But yeah, you can make SCAP triggers, presumption triggers, which is on the 2NR page. Um, Yeah, a lot of the time, psychoanalysis debaters, well, I don't call them psychoanalysis debaters. I think they're just fake debaters who are reading psychoanalysis to win rounds, but they'll just use psychoanalysis to trigger whatever trick they want to actually go for to win the round, which I fear is ungenuine. But also, like, it's debate. Everyone's doing everything to win a round. I just actually like psychoanalysis, so I don't tend to do those things. But other than that, do we have questions? I'm going to take that as a no. Speak now and forever hold your peace. Okay, wonderful. So things to do in the 2NR. The first thing is you want to pick one link, going for both like a topic link or like politics link, and then like the debate link is going to be one, unproductive use of time. Two, there's much more extrapolations that you can make off of just going for one link. So for example, if you go for the topic link, then you can still make like consequentialist arguments about how embracing the lack solves for like whatever harms the app is trying to solve. But if you also go for the debate link, then you put yourself in a double bind because then you're also trying to solve for like these hypothetical situations, which is also an investment in the lack, which is bad. So you should just pick one link and go for it instead of going for both. Um, and then whenever you're extending the K, there's two methods that I was taught. The first one is like was I was like they called it the basket method. I don't think this is an actual name. I think they just named it this because it makes sense. Um, you have the different sections of the K, and you'll extend them separately and then answer the work done on each section there. So it would be like extend the debate link, and then you would answer the arguments made there, and then like extend like the theory of power, answer the arguments there. Kind of do it separately. And then the other one is just like you extend the K all in one go, and then you just answer it like on the line by line or whatever. Um, I tend to do the second one just because it requires less thought out planning ahead of time. Um, but I do think the basket method is probably a better strat. And oftentimes is makes it easier for judges to flow and follow and understand. And then going for conceited tricks, this would just be like the things on the aforementioned page. And you can really one blow these out of proportion in the 2NR and extrapolate them a lot. I think with psychoanalysis, the reason why a lot of people don't why a lot of judges one are hesitant to vote on psychoanalysis and why it's like a lot of the judges, if they don't really understand Ks or they're worried about people just like running Ks they don't understand, they'll always use psychoanalysis as an example, which is kind of unfortunate. But just because people don't really know psychoanalysis and they just run it to run it. But the more deeper of an understanding you have of psychoanalysis, the better your psycho 2NRs are going to be because you can explain things really well. Um, for example, last year in elims at Columbia, I had a panel and one of the judges was like, you can run Ks, except I have like no understanding. And if I can't explain the K back to you, I'm not going to vote on it. And she had psychoanalysis explicitly mentioned in her paradigm. And I was like, well, I'll just explain it well and pray for the best, which worked out. I got her ballot. Um, and at like UT, like a month ago or whatever, um, I had Sam. I'm gonna mess up their last name. It's like McLaughlin, something like that. Anyways, I lost the round, but after she was like, "This is the most coherent explanation of psychoanalysis I have ever heard," and I was like, "OMG!" But like, if you understand psychoanalysis and like you read the literature and you like watch the stupid YouTube videos on it, you can like give really good explanations that can explain out the entirety of the app in psychoanalytic terms and explain why only the alt can solve. Um, but yeah, you can just blow things out of proportion a lot if you understand psychoanalysis. Um, and then also you can go for psychoanalysis as a presumption push, like we talked about earlier. I'll just be really sad if you do, because I feel like this isn't real debate, but I can't control what you do, and it is a strategy that people use. Um, so that's like all the stuff that you need to do on like the K page, and then it's other like generic 2NR work. Um, I think that's it. Yeah, that's just answering psychoanalysis. So before we get there, are there any questions? Okay, I'm gonna take that as a no. So, answering psychoanalysis. There's five ways that I isolated. There's probably more. This is just what I could think of, slash four of these I think are more strategic. The first one is falsifiability, which is everyone's go-to. I do think it's the least strategic out of all of them because every person who reads psychoanalysis is going to have like a 2 second answer to this, and you are going to waste more time making the argument in the 1AR than they are going to spend answering it in the 2NR. Also, in most cases, nobody understands what psychoanalysis says. I had this revelation sophomore year when I was talking with a teammate. after we had like a round that came down to falsifiability, and I was like, wait, pause. What does falsifiability actually say? Because we were both just saying words. And he was like, that's actually a really good question. So we Googled it. It's just the idea for a theory to be proven theoretically false. I think there's a little bit more to it than that. That's just like the very rundown explanation. The implications there are one, there aren't really any because we um have accepted a lot of theories without them being falsifiable. EX, what was it? Einstein's theory of relativity. Um, we took that one and ran with it before it was proven falsifiable. And then also the guy who created the idea of falsifiability was a philosopher, not a scientist, which is kind of sketch. The second is that he was incredibly racist. So maybe don't read racist people's arguments. That's sometimes a 2-hour argument I will make, but usually not because judges aren't terribly down to vote on like a one-line IVI. The second one is that the theory is inherently homophobic, which is kind of unfortunately true. I just explained this away to that's not what modern psychoanalysis um is predicated upon, but Lacan was a student of Freud, right? So a lot of this theory is based upon Freud's psychosexual theory of development that's inherently heteronormative, because of the name and how he just like theorizes about how we like become subjects. Freud theorizes how we become subjects and like the various phases we go through that are interlinked with Lacan's stages of development, like the mirror stage, which isn't explicitly based in the psychosexual theory of development, but other portions of Lacan are. I just didn't get into them because they're less relevant in debate. Yes, Lily.
They are.
What are?
Wait, sorry. I was wondering whether you'd seen my hand or the question in the chat. Okay. I said, is anyone actually reading first person Lacan? Because that just seems
No.
like baiting the IVI. Yeah, okay.
No. No one is reading first person Lacan because one, he was French, all of his works are in French. There are translations of it, but his works are called the Écrits. Um yeah, his works are called the Écrits, and they basically are just really long and um complicated. A lot of people won't read Lacan's Écrits until they have like a solid understanding of Lacan. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense reading it. Um, I was told my sophomore year by the person who taught me Lacan to just like not read the Creeds. It's not worth your time. Unless you like just want to do it for fun, then go for it. I was going to do it, and then I just got busy junior year and senior year, and haven't gotten around to it yet. Um, but no one is reading Source Lacan. Like no one, zero people are reading Source Lacan.
Okay, I have like a follow-up question. Um,
Yes.
so like Lacan and a lot of his like okay, Lacan's actual psychoanalysis, as in like taking in patients, like I know he like hit his like patients and also was like really misogynistic and whatever. Does that implicate itself in the theory people read and debate?
Um, well, I didn't know about the hitting people part. That's kind of awkward. Um, did not know that one. The misogynistic stuff, no, it doesn't implicate. Okay, well, that's a lie. It implicates itself the same way that Freud's theory implicates itself, i.e., if you look into it, yes, but no one is looking into it, so no. And also, if you just take like the modern understandings of the theories, it doesn't include that. For example, like Freud and Lacan both talk about this thing called penis envy, which I'm not gonna explain. It's really weird. But it ultimately doesn't matter to the overall theory of their theories. And it's kind of irrelevant in the context of what we're talking about. So you can just exclude that and just apply the theory of psychoanalysis to everyone. I will say, I don't know why. Like the psychosexual theory of development was all like very heteronormative, but then simultaneously they had like these clinics where they just like let people like try being gay. Because they were like, well, maybe if you think you're gay, maybe you are.
I have some
Try it
bad
out
news
and
about that.
see.
I have some really bad
Um,
news. I went down like a rabbit hole of like finding IVIs to read against Psycho like last year, I think. And like there's don't I would just say don't look into that. You probably don't want to look into that.
yeah, yeah. I wasn't really planning on it. The next one is that the lack doesn't matter, which is not true, but most psychoanalysis debaters don't know what their K actually says, and more likely than not will not be able to articulate why the lack being a thing is important. They'll just like cross apply the Rudy 14 card and be like, no, but like pursuing the lack like lowers your value to life. Um, no, me like trying to be happy can like make me happy sometimes. Crazy thought. Like me going out with my friends is not going to make me unhappy. It's going to make me happier for the time being. Sure, I'll want to go out with my friends later, but that doesn't negate the fact that it did bring me some amount of pleasure and like relieve some of that tension or anxiety. Um, yeah, most people aren't going to be able to like answer that unless they actually understand psychoanalysis, which again is not going to be majority of the debate population. The next is that psychoanalysis doesn't apply to the world around us. The argument is that psychoanalysis was created to understand individuals, so we can't use it to understand like the government, state, policy actions, or things like that. Um, the way that I answer this is that one, the state is controlled by people, so we can understand the way that people's desires function and which they use to control the state. And then two, we're using psychoanalysis as an epistemological framework through which to view the world. Which like solves for that because we're just using it as like a philosophical framework the same way that you would use like Kant or something. I do think a lot of people again aren't going to be able to have like a terribly coherent explanation of why psychoanalysis can still be applied to the world around us. If you're able to articulate the fact that psychoanalysis was based around Lacan's individual sessions with individual clients, through which he theorized how, well, most of his theory was written as an explanation for how we get traumatized and how trauma functions, which is where all the real stuff comes from, which is like honestly my favorite part about psychoanalysis, but that's like irrelevant to debate. Um, but yeah, most people aren't gonna be able to give you a coherent explanation. And then the last one, which I think is probably the best, most strategic one, because every time someone does read this, I have to spend time thinking about it, and I'm like, God damn it. But anyways, it's you turn desire and you say that desire is productive. A lot of the time, this is based in Deleuze and Guattari's theories because Deleuze and Lacan were like frenemies. Um, like IRL, they were friends, but then like in the scientific community, they hated each other's ideas. They thought that like each other was the most incorrect person to have ever existed. So they have so many things just like bashing the other person's theories. The most popular of which is Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus, which is just like an entire book going against like Freud and Lacan. Because they're like, no, desire is good. Desire motivates us to take actions that are good. Um, and yeah, usually this is the most strategic answer, in my opinion. You definitely can find stuff on the wiki that people have read about this. Um, but yeah, you also can just make it analytic. Um, and explain that like the desire is productive and is how like we take literally any action around us, i.e., we wouldn't have like past like I think it's always best to contextualize your answers depending on what the app is. So for example, if it's just like a structural violence app, like um the Civil Rights Act of 1964 wouldn't have been passed absent people's desires for a more equal society, which it did significantly push civil rights movements and was like a huge win. So I think that this is the best answer out of all of these, in my humble opinion. But that's just my opinion. Um, any questions? No. Okay. I do think that might be the end of what's on the presentation. Yeah. So from here, we can chit chat about psychoanalysis in the ways that like y'all want to talk about it. I think we have until 1:45, so that's like 14 minutes to chat about like other questions. Um, okay, Deleuze and Lacan hated each other, I think much later in their life after they had like years of um just like going back and forth with each other about how each other's theories were like the most stupid things ever. And then they started hating each other, but that was much later. They used to be friends. Like they would just like go over to each other's houses for like tea and whatever.
I heard that
Yeah.
like they fell out because of Lacan's theories on drug use. That's what I heard. That may be incorrect.
Wait, what were Lacan's theories on drug use? I know Deleuze is the one who is like, guys, we should all get high all the time.
No,
Uh,
because it's weird. I think okay. So from my understanding, like Lacan thought that drug use was like good because it was a way of embracing the lack for some reason. Because he thought like it was like a rejection of like productive like in attempts to fill the lack in favor of like pure pleasure and like embracing your drives. And then Deleuze was like a drug addict who literally ended up dying out of complication from drug use. And I thought like what I was taught is that like Deleuze like thought that like drug addiction was like bad and that Lacan was like promoting.
okay, well, that goes contrary to my understanding because one, a lot of, well, not a lot of, there's like this one particular author that's like read in debate. Their name is Saldana. It's an extension of Deleuze that talks about how um by like being high on psychedelics 24/7, we're able to like maximize our affect, which is good for whatever reason. Um, and then Lacan was anti-psychedelics because, or not even just like psychedelics specifically, back to like the whole real and trauma thing. Lacan's understanding of trauma is that it happens whenever you encounter the real again post alienation. That is a traumatizing experience that forever like reshapes your understanding of like the world and like everything around you. The two ways post alienation to encounter the real for Lacan is one, trauma, um, which he like did not firsthand experience, but like secondhand experience through his clients' experiences like with war and PTSD. And the second one was through really bad LSD trips, like very specifically LSD trips that were just like crazy. Um, and a lot of people will talk about like or like will relate to this like those two portions of Lacan because they'll be like, yeah, I underwent like a really bad LSD trip and then I was never the same person again. And I am still trying to like be the same person I was before that really bad trip, comma, but I can't. And then same thing with trauma. Um, so that's interesting. I'm unsure which is correct because I don't want to make any like broad generalizations. Um, but yeah, this is what
Wait,
I have read.
I have like an actually productive question now. I'm sorry. I've just been like,
No, you're
but
good.
like jouissance in the context of like Pascal.
So in the context of pest case, Wisconsin is just like the motivating factor that causes people to be violent against like whatever minorities. So Wisconsin is just like the ultimate form of pleasure for both Freud and Lacan. Wisconsin, as used in pest case, is what uh motivates people to be like discriminatory because they think that that will bring them ultimate pleasure by having like control over other people or like enforcing their power over other people. Does anyone else have questions? Not that you can't have questions, you can have more questions. I just haven't heard other people speak. No? Does anyone have any thoughts, comments, questions?
I feel like the tricks for this case specifically are really fun.
They are. They're very fun. Um, I think a lot of the times you have to give really good explanations of the
Yeah.
tricks. Otherwise, judges aren't willing to vote on it. I have an RFD from someone that now coaches me. This was my sophomore year before we knew each other like that. And it was like I lost the round, but he was like, the only place, like the only other place I see myself voting on is extinction spillover argument, but I don't really like it, and I don't really think there's a good enough explanation for me to vote off of it since I don't particularly like it. And I was
Nah.
like, damn, okay. Fair enough though. That was sophomore year me when I probably did not have the most coherent understanding of psychoanalysis.
Yeah. No, I kind of get that with like running Boulder because you have to explain everything so thoroughly and it just gets like kind of messy in round because you have to also focus on everything else that you're talking about and answering their arguments while at the same time making your judge understand what you're actually yapping about, you know?
Yeah, I do think that's like the one con, which is why like I every single time it's always like one or two off psychoanalysis and then like
Yeah.
something else. Usually activist games. Activist games goes really well with psychoanalysis because they have like very similar theories. Well, activist games is much simpler. It's just like you're reading arguments or like you're using real world violence in debate to win rounds, which recreates the violence. Yes,
Hmm.
activist games is very simple. It's literally just like you read arguments in debate about real world violence in order to win rounds. Debaters would rather have their like harms that they talk about continue to happen in the real world rather than actually go out and fix them so that they can keep winning rounds off of them. So examples that I will give is yes, like suffering reps. They are tooling this violence to win this debate round rather than actually like protesting on the streets or calling their congressperson or writing emails right now. If they actually cared about this issue, they would not be here spending their time at a debate tournament. Um, the other part of activist game, oh, the other argument is like most people that you talk to, especially usual debaters, will tell you this is true. Like I have a really good friend, um, who like exclusively runs UTIL. And we're obviously very different argumentative wise, and like we talk about this. And every once in a while he'd be like, oh my God, do you see X thing that happened? This is gonna make such a fire diss ad. And I was like, Anderson, do you hear yourself? Activist games is true. And he was like, yeah, probably. But like, this is gonna be a really good diss ad. And I'm like, okay, have fun with it.
I have a group chat with like a bunch of my friends who do LD, and people will be like, "Oh yeah, no, I remember the most recent one. It was like, "Oh, did you see the like boat Russia sank off Spain? This is going to be such good uniqueness for like my unclose diss ad." And every single time someone says something like that, someone goes, "That's a link to Psycho."
Yeah, I fear it is. It's a better link to activist games, but it's also a link to Psycho. Um, okay. Did I answer everyone's questions about psychoanalysis they had like coming into it or like what they wanted to learn about psychoanalysis? Oh, Rachel, you're right. If you read Baudrillard, it can't get worse than that. Psychoanalysis is like infinitely better, I fear.
That's what I've been saying. Boulder is just so weird.
I hate like truth level, I hate Baudrillard. Like I have read Baudrillard like outside of debate for non-debate purposes. Just because I found out about Baudrillard and I was like, this guy seems funky. Baudrillard is not based in the slightest.
Wait, no,
Yeah,
I actually think Baudrillard is like objectively correct. Like I don't like especially like first person Lacan, I don't know what he's yapping about. And the fact that he had dementia, like undiagnosed dementia for like 10 years of his life makes me think he didn't know what he was yapping about either. Like like
okay,
when
but Baudrillard like
no,
um
first person Baudrillard, like if you read the lit, it's like A, this is kind of correct in the context of like the world as it exists, and B, like he ex
Is she frozen for you guys?
yeah,
This is really funny.
yeah.
I mean,
activity
like, both of
of the
their
desire
ideas are like
machine
fundamentally,
is
they have some
shaped by the
validity.
fundamental
Oh,
alienation from the
what's happening?
Lily, I fear you're like completely frozen. I don't know if you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. Maybe I should put that in the chat. Let me type that out. I think Lacan on a like scientific level, false. Like there's no backing for that one. Scientifically. I think like the whole like, epistemological framework through which to view the world is like a line for like the K, but I also do think it's true. I do think though, this is me and my old teammate talked about this a couple times because he
Oh,
was like, I'm gonna hope that they join back. Um, anyways, um, like he knew that I love psychoanalysis, and he was like, "You're weird for that." I was like, "No, psychoanalysis is true." And he was like, "Sure." And then he comes to me one day, and he's like, "Sumya, there's this philosopher that's literally Lacan but better." Um, and do I think he's Lacan but better? No. But his bases are all like purely philosophical. There's no like scientific claims that are not true. Um, but that would be Albert Camus. Love the guy. The main book that talks about it is The Myth of Sisyphus. I have it sitting on my bookshelf. It's like thoroughly annotated. I like that's one book that I keep going back to reread. Like if I'm bored and I want to read a book, but I don't want to read a book, I read that book because I've like read it a million times. Um, I think that's like the most true one because I think psychoanalysis is true. I think psychoanalysis is true. By extension, I also think Camus' theory about absurdism is also true.
Wait, what does he
Like
say?
he literally like makes all the same claims that Lacan makes, just like based in philosophy. He's like, we like life is like strange and absurd, just like the nature of it. So, hello. I'm explaining Camus, which is like Lacan, but philosophy and not based in science. Um, I wrote like the actual like explanation for how did we get to absurdity, but he's like, the only like meanings in life are things that we assign to have meaning. For example, like, I don't know, like winning debates and like tournaments and whatever isn't actually meaningful unless you give it meaning. Because of that, we try to give life a meaning, but life has no like true intrinsic meaning. So the more that we try to like talk about it or whatever, or like the more that we try to like find this true meaning to life, the more unhappy we become. So we have to embrace the absurdity of life and recognize that there is no true meaning other than the meaning that we assign it and live with the absurdity. The book that he has that's about all this is called The Myth of Sisyphus. And it's based on the myth of Sisyphus, which for those of you who don't know is like a Roman, not Roman, it's a Greek story about this like Titan or like random dude who did something against the gods, and they're like, for punishment, you are going to roll this boulder up a hill. And every time it gets to the top, it's going to roll back down. And for all of eternity, you're going to constantly try to roll it to the top. But every single time, it rolls back down. And Camille was like, well, what do we do now? Why does Sisyphus keep doing this? Why does he do anything? Because he's always destined to fail. Like, can he never be happy again? Which, like, is it supposed to be a punishment? Yes. But Camus is like, well, no. Sisyphus can be happy. You just have to imagine Sisyphus is happy. Thus, you can like do anything as long as you understand the absurdity of situations and you just take them for what it is. Like Sisyphus doesn't have to understand his situation to be a perpetual eternal punishment. He can understand it to be just a situation that he's in and something he has to do without assigning it the negative meaning and thus like can access like happiness or whatever. Um yeah, that's Camus. Um Lacan is based in science in the sense that it's based in psychoanalysis, which is like pseudoscience. But the psychoanalyst will tell you that it's real science, which I unfortunately cannot get behind that one, no matter how much I love Lacan and psychoanalysis. Um, who was based though, because that one is not making false claims. But it is 1:45. Y'all are free to leave. If you have any questions, or if you want, actually, you know what? I'm gonna send my email in the chat. If you actually, that's I lied. I don't think I can do that. You can message me on Slack, I think, with a third party. I think it has to be like one of the board members. Um, I don't know. If you ask your lab leaders, they'll find a way to get in contact with me if you want any other resources. Or do y'all want me to drop the PDF of Tom McGowan's Enjoying What We Don't Have? I think you can email me post lab. I'm unsure. I'm gonna end the recording here because y'all are officially allowed to